bedroom, and it has in it two unusual beds. As you can see, they are identical, solid wood, rather ornate in the decoration at the top especially, well, at the foot also. These beds have an interesting story. When my grandparents were to be married, grandfather and grandmother Smoot, back in Bowling Green, Kentucky, her family said ahead of time, "We are going to give you a bed for a wedding present." And they said, "Good, thank you." Well, shortly, his folks down in Huntington, Tennessee, sent word, "For a wedding present, we want to give you a bed." And so they said, "Thank you," not indicating they'd already been promised one. When the two beds arrived, they were identical. These two you are looking at. One the Kentucky bed, one the Tennessee bed, and precisely the same. Now, I'll admit, down underneath somewhere, my father used to be able to tell which one was a Kentucky bed and which one was a Tennessee bed, but I've long forgotten how he did that and certainly haven't looked at the underpinnings for a long time. At any rate, I thought always when I heard that story growing up that that was really most unusual. And of course, both of them were brought here to Texas when the family moved and built this house. But in many later years, along in the 1950s actually, my father and I went back to Kentucky on a little visit, as he liked to do occasionally, leaving my mother here to take care of my aunt who was ill at the time. Anyway, we stayed in the old inn, I-N-N, at Bardstown, Kentucky, a delightful place, picturesque, very historic. When we were ushered to our rooms in the inn at Bardstown, I was more than amazed to find the bed in my room exactly like these two beds. And I could not believe it, so I ran down the hall to my father's room, and I said, "Daddy, come look at the bed in my room." And he said, "Before I go, you come in here and look at the bed in my room." And the bed in his room was exactly like these two beds also. Well, that, of course, was just astounding. So when I went to the man downstairs, the owner of the inn, I said, "I just can't believe those beds upstairs. Where did you get those two beds?" And he was rather bored with the question. He says, "Well, they're just ordinary old beds we have around here." And I said, "Surely not." And I told about our two beds. And he was very bored with the whole thing. He said, "Every bedroom in this place is furnished with a bed like that," because that was just the common, ordinary bed here many, many years ago. And so we did ask more people and found out this was true. I think this is indicative for young people now in the 1990s to understand, because these common, ordinary beds were made just for use, but they have a considerable amount of artistic talent in them. They are beautiful for display, both the head of the bed and the foot of the bed. They're certainly strong, being of solid walnut, very strong, and maybe not as big as modern beds, but they have lasted well and will continue lasting well. The point of all this is that artisans in those days did not simply make a thing for a use, but they put themselves into it. They put their artistic talent, their craftsmanship, and real pleasure into the making of whatever they were constructing. So these beds bear witness to that fact. Also in this room, on this wall, a painting that shows something of the life in days gone by. Here in Austin, and I'm sure around the country, there were itinerant painters who would stay in a locale as long as they were able to get commissions. When people no longer wanted any more of their work, they would travel to some other place and stay as long as they could get commissions. This particular portrait was done by a painter who lived just east of the Capitol. We have a letter from my father in which he refers to this painting, and he said that the painter was living in a little log cabin, which was a boarding house just east of the Capitol, where the State Library is now housed. And the painter admired my father. He was just a child, just a toddler at the time, and so the painter wanted to paint his picture. Well, my father disliked this painting intensely because, for one thing, nobody ever thought it looked like him, and he thought it made him look like a girl, and it had all of those shifting clouds around it, which made it look as if he might even be a spirit in heaven and not of this earth. Anyway, my father did not like this picture at all, but grandmother was able to like it in spite of the fact that it did not apparently look like him. It was a beautiful picture of one sort or another. There are other pictures in the house, that is paintings, I should say, paintings, which were done by itinerant painters, by that one and by others as well. They're in other parts of the house. Here we have evidence of my father's own artistry and craftsmanship. We keep repeating that he enjoyed working with his hands, and he produced some items which truly gave a lot of pleasure. This closet, which was originally a clothes closet, has come to hold all of the joys of childhood. This dollhouse, which my father made for me when I was about 5 years old, as well as other pieces of furniture. Off to that side, you may not be able to see, is a dresser, a pretty good sized dresser, doll's dresser, with 3 drawers, and not only a large adult sized mirror, but a beveled mirror at that. It's full of doll clothes, has doll china on top. Down here on the floor in front of the doll closet, doll house rather, is a little bed for a doll, and it has a baby doll in it, one of the large size baby dolls. Coming back around, hard to see in this very crowded situation, there is a wardrobe, a doll wardrobe, which is full of doll clothes and even a couple of dolls. And here a little red chair holding a French doll. This French doll has had a very hard life. I must tell you that it was originally used as decoration in the show window of a famous woman who had a hat shop here in Austin. She had ordered this doll from Paris because it was the fad at that time to have whatever you could get from Paris to put in your show window to appeal to people to come in. Anyway, she had bought this doll and had it in the window. So my aunt went in to buy a hat one day and found the woman taking this doll out, feeling that it was shop worn, it was somewhat faded by the sun, and she was taking it out so as to put something fresh into the window, but didn't quite know what to do with the doll. So my aunt said, would you be willing to sell it? And Miss Josephine, it was Josephine, the famous Josephine's hat shop, Miss Josephine said, well, she hadn't thought of that, but she guessed she might. Anyway, they made a deal, and Sister came home with a French doll. Now, the thing that affected me most was that all my folks were so much impressed by this French doll from Paris that they did not think the poor thing should be exposed to daily life with me. And so they forbade me to play with it. And they made it sit up just for decoration around here and said I would have to preserve it and take care of it. And I did that for the most part, always with a slight feeling of resentment, I must imagine. But now, in later years, looking at my dolls, which did have to live with me on a daily basis, I can understand why they wanted this one preserved. But I think it's very interesting irony that the doll, just sitting up, being decoration, caught so much dust and so much other wear and tear that it looks just about as beaten up as my own dolls that were played with. Anyway, getting back to the dollhouse itself, my father made much of the furniture in there, and my mother made most of the doll clothes. Some of the dolls are quite special. The one in the upper right bedroom, lying in the bed with the little bonnet around its head, has a special porcelain face that is considered very good in dolls. And in the parlor just below, that ungainly looking doll sitting in the chair there is not pretty, certainly not, or graceful, or even lifelike, but it's handmade. Let me reach that for you to see. It's handmade of bits of cloth, the whole of it limp and ungainly, but very old, and the face awkwardly painted, as maybe you can see, a little bit of hair, some sort of knitting thread, and a little dress that has the panties showing right underneath it. The hands and the feet not finished. Excuse me, early morning fog. One more thing in this part of the room, the children's chairs right here. These two small chairs were for my father and his brother, the larger chair for his older brother Asher, and the smaller one for my father. They are now delicate, and we protect them, but in those days they were considered very strong, and they were well used by the little boys. This chair is another example of the way people in those days had their own folding furniture. This is a lounge chair or a deck chair, which folds completely, and it expands completely. You see how it stretches out, and then by folding all of the parts, it can be reduced to a rectangle about 3 feet long and can be carried with one hand. It's that light in weight, and it's all walnut, and a very useful utilitarian chair. We have actually used it in the family, but now we try to protect it, as we do all of the old pieces, which means everything around here. We're still in the west bedroom, simply turned around the other side of it, the other end of it. Here is a magical chair. This wicker, which you can see has a very ornate design in this part of the wicker, not to mention, and the caning rather, and then this part of the wicker is quite elaborate, and also the rest of it. Let me tell you about the new life of this chair. My earliest memories of it had it as a very much kicked about old chair, which was covered in some kind of chintz, a chintz which was badly stained and beaten up. The chair was out on the porch and was used just for odd and end purposes. Very comfortable, but never thought of as anything more than just an odd old chair. The day came when even this old chintz began to split and give way, and I felt the time had come I had to deal with it. So I had Mrs. Finnig down here on West 5th come get it and take it off. I didn't even bother to go down with it and talk with her. I told her, I said, you see it's covered with chintz, and so if you would just find, please, a piece of chintz, approximately the same coloring and similar design, and put it on there, I'll appreciate it. So I was busy here in the house several days later when she called and she said, come down here, I have something to show you. Well, I said, what is it? I'm busy. And she said, never mind, you come. So I went quickly. I even walked and cut through lots down this way to go, so close. Well, when I got there, she took me back in her place and showed me this chair. only I couldn't believe it was my chair. I said, well, now, that's not my chair. I said, I like that very much, but this is your chair, she said. She had found underneath all of the padding of old blankets and this rotten chintz on top, she had found this lovely wicker chair. I say lovely, of course it has been broken in places, and you can tell its age, but as I say, I don't believe in putting too much guilt on the lily. I like for it to show its reality, and so I don't mind the broken places, but I still consider it a lovely old chair, and I'm delighted we found out what it really is underneath all of the dirty chintz. Right here in front of me at the foot of this bed is a cedar chest, which was my mother's hope chest. And my mother, like all other young ladies of the time, I suppose, learned how to do a great deal of intricate handwork, sewing, you know, embroidery, crochet, knitting, tatting, the rest of it, lace making. It was one of their major hobbies. They didn't have entertainments of the kind we have now, so they did give themselves much to this sort of hobby. At any rate, she filled not only this cedar chest, but other chests and drawers in the house with her many embroidered pieces and crochet pieces, knitted pieces, and so forth. We did use them for a while in my childhood, but they were extra work to launder and iron. And finally, with so many people here in the house to be taken care of, she put these pieces away and we turned to more practicable things. However, we still have some of her lace showing in these two framed pieces on the wall. The frames were made on the scroll saw by my father, as we've said over and over. The lace in the background of each of these my mother made. The buttons are various kinds of old buttons that came from the clothing of my two grandmothers. Here, the clothing of Grandmother Smoot. Now, I'm speaking of clothing which was so badly worn in fabric that it was not worth being saved, but the buttons were interesting. And over here, buttons on the clothing of my grandmother Williams, again, the fabric being too much worn to be saved, but the buttons very interesting. Incidentally, I'm interested in the fact that the different style of buttons, apparently during the same era. Here, very dark, very elegant, very detailed. I know that they don't show too well in the picture, but dark, elegant, very well detailed. Here, buttons of a much lighter color and of a different medium, totally different style, just as you would find in any woman's clothing, I suppose. Well, other pieces here, but these are the major items of interest here in the West bedroom.